Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar. Today, we'll be talking specifically about understanding your saddle, knowing it a little bit better, and how to determine, if it's suitable just in regards to the condition alone, and also if it's suitable for your horse, and a little bit of insight as to the billets, how they can be used to help certain asymmetries that you might find in the horse, as well as looking at the panels, looking at tree curve, and understanding the different components of the saddle a little bit better so that when you look at your own or you look at ones when you are out saddle shopping, you can easily discern if something is good, bad, will fit you, will fit your horse a little bit better as opposed to just relying on the word of a saddle fitter that you might call out. So as per usual, we'll give people a little bit of time to join in. We are very excited for this week's webinar, and it is a continuation of some of the posts that we've been publishing this week. So if you've missed them, you can always go back, check them out. There's a ton of information on all of our posts, as all of them are meant to be educational and to give you unbiased insight as to how you can protect yourself and protect your horse from damage caused by the saddle. All right, so now I'm just going to pass it over to Jochen and we'll begin.
I love this video. Sonia, thank you so much for making this video. Hello, everybody. And just like Sonia said, we are super excited for this week's seminar. And as usual, we would like to give back what we learned and heard over all these years. And Saddlefit for Life, main focus is to protect horse and rider from long-term damage, what can be caused from ill-fitting saddles. Now, not everybody has the chance to get a custom-made saddle made. And even if it gets made, sometimes they have questions and people say, well, what does it mean, my saddle fit, or what is saddle fitting really entails? And all these weeks or all these webinars, what we're trying to do is make it easier to understand. Now, who am I to say this is the right way or this is the way it should be? Well, let's put it this way. I'm in this industry since, I'm riding since 1966, and I'm started to become a saddle maker in 1978. And once I did my apprenticeship years, and then I went to master school, did my master's in 1984. And when I came to North America in 1986, I always had this urge, there gotta be more knowledge and people who have a little bit more understanding, not necessarily how to make a saddle, but about how the saddle fits and how we can protect horse and rider. So I made it my mission as a rider. I wanted to say, okay, if I ride and jump over high fences, I wanted to ask the experts, experts from all over the world who dedicated their life as veterinarians. Code of honor they live by is do no harm to the animal. And some veterinarians, like these three here, specialize in all different fields when it comes to the equine athlete, the horse, and how Saddlefit relates to it. And even old schools like the Spanish riding school make it very clear, the rider needs to have a seat. So the saddle has to fit the rider first. And in order for the rider to develop a good seat, the rider doesn't have a good seat, the saddle will never fit the horse. So we have veterinarians, we have riding schools, which are over 400 years old, and we have medical doctors. We have medical doctors who say, there's a massive difference between male and female pelvis. And just like when you go to a store and you buy yourself clothes, you as a guy go to the male section, and as a girl you go to the female section. And this medical doctor here wrote the importance that people understand saddles can be made for the anatomy of the horse, of course, but mainly also for the proper gender, so there are saddles made for male or females. And then we got the problems the rider could achieve when you don't ride in the right saddles. Veterinarians have better equipped tools. And that's what Saddle Fit for Life wants to do. We want to help you to share our knowledge we collected over the last 42 years. And we would like to bring that with people from all over the world, like this veterinarian from Sao Paulo, or this lady here for New Zealand, who talks about how important saddle fit is to the horse. And she explains this with the dissection of the horse here and shows the tree, how many trees are wrong designed, or the metal point is pushing and damaging the bone or the scapula. Some veterinarian go as much as pointing on top of the horse and says, look at the riders, how they ride. So we have medical doctors who now look a little bit closer of why does the horse suffer so much from saddle. Sometimes it's the person on top, So the question comes, why do so many people hang in the horse's mouth, and the secret in good riding is good hands. And then we have all these different opinions about training method. And yet it's pretty straightforward when we look at the horse's facial expression. And that's what this veterinarian did. I love that the people take the time and says, okay, the horse may not speak German or doesn't speak English, but they have a facial expression. This is what this veterinarian did. She wrote a paper on what does that mean when the horse's eyes are wide, the ears go back. And these are the books I wrote, one in German, one in English. And it's now in the third print. I'm really proud about this. This last year won an innovation award, not innovation, education award for best educational book in Kentucky. And again, we now are very fortunate that we are able to bring this online, this education. We have 4 seminars, big seminars coming up this year still, but we have over 20 courses online what explains, saddle fitting a little bit better and makes it pretty much easy, not what brand is better or if Western is better than English. That's not the point. The point is that people need to know the why, because most people who know the how will always follow the people who know the why. So if we understand what changed a lot, such as the breeding, we know that horses what used to be rectangle are now bred with a much shorter back, an upright rectangle with 2 long legs, 2 short saddle support area. And there's a lot of veterinarians who are good riders. We had a wonderful webinar with Karen Liebrand from Holland, and she's a veterinarian and a dressage rider, and I loved how she expressed it. And she says, there got to be more than brutal force or just injection. There got to be alternative medicine, and there got to be also a more hormoneful riding. And kind of that's what it's all about. And I could watch this video 100 times, because here we can see in this video, this lady here has chosen all kinds of experts to help her. And I'm going to stop the video right here. Every horse will show you in the flank the dark circle. So that's where you do not want to have the saddle sitting. And when I let it go on a little bit, in the second you can see how far the saddle is actually sitting in that dark circle. So little things like this, what soldiers knew for a long, long time, it says, okay, if the saddle sits in that dark circle, so in other words, the saddle is too long and it hits these lumbar versus processes, you have huge problem. Now, who am I to say it, right? All I just showed you is information we collected over all these years from veterinarians who do not care what brand or what breeding you ride, right? If you're a girl or a boy, they just know the anatomy of the horse. And then on top of it, very simple tools can very quick detect if the horse is stressed through the elevated heart rate or gait analysis and so on and so forth. So there is so many cool ways of passing information on, and this is what we're all about. Saddle Fit for Life. It's a global network of professionals who would like to protect horses and riders from ill-fitting saddles, and so they don't cause long-term damage, right? So it doesn't matter if you're an Olympic rider or pleasure rider, an equine professional in any division, the interface between horse and rider, the saddle, has to fit the gender appropriate. You got to have a female. If you're a female, you got to have a female saddle, and it has to fit not what I say or what some saddle company who wants to sell a certain brand or certain idea. It has to fit what is the anatomy of the horse. Okay, and this is what's all about. And I think, Sonia, this is why we find so many people from all over the world coming towards us, because we don't want to make it just brand related. We want to make it related what's to the horse, isn't it?
Yes, we're very careful as to.
I think we lost Sonia, but anyway, so that's what we're here for you, and we would like to dedicate this remaining of this hour to you, and for questions, what I love to answer. Sonia, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me? Hello.
Okay, so it looks like I have to find her. So what can I share with you? I can share with you maybe, here we go. Let me just ring her. Sonia, we can't seem to hear you on the webinar. Are you there?
Yep, I'm there.
Okay, so we are ready for the first question.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you now.
Okay.
Little
All
glitch,
right.
but we're ready for the first question.
All right. So the first question is actually about billets, and specifically about billets that can most of the time be moved. So for example, a dressage saddle with a billet on a rigging system. So for what reason would a rider cross the billets?
Okay. I like to elaborate a little bit on this, and I want to show you a book here. So this book here was the first book I written, and I had a good friend of mine helping me with the historical part, and he says one of the very famous saddle is the Mcclellan saddle, and the Mcclellan saddle, you see here, it has a buckle right there on the end, and the soldier could move the billets back or forward, left and right, independently. But you also see how there is a gap created where my fingers is right there. Okay, so the billets never would go straight down, even if it comes a little bit more forward. Right there where the lower billet was, there was a big O-ring where the billet could then also go into the right spot. So the reason I started with this picture is because the first thing the soldier had to learn is how to get the rigging in the right position of the horse. And sometimes we had to cross the billets. So let me see if I can, oops, share my screen again. Here we go. I'm going to go to a screen here, and maybe that's easier to explain with pictures. Okay, so sometimes when I look at the skeleton of a horse, the upper arm is very upright, so that the shoulder blade slopes very far back. So we got line 1 over the widest part of the shoulder, and line 2 is behind the shoulder. And as we all know, we want to have freedom for the horse's movements in the shoulder, so we can't put the saddle on. So if you put the saddle behind the shoulder and the scapula of that horse is really, really far back, and your saddle sits nicely between line 2 and line 4, if the billets would come out in the center, the rider, see what this lady does, has to pull the billets forward, because that horse here has a very sloped shoulder, and in order to get that saddle off the shoulder, the saddle has to sit behind the shoulder, But now she has to jerk these billets forward. And if you just jerk these billets forward, what happens is it will pull the saddle forward. Now look at the muscular picture here. Here you see the triceps. And similar to that saddle picture I just showed you out of my book, you see that V here from these different muscle groups. Here you see the tricep, and here you see the latissimus. It crosses, by nature they cross. So crossing the billets, what it will allow is the first billet will be going back to the second buckle of the girth. The back billet runs parallel with the latissimus muscle, crosses where nature crosses the trapezius and latissimus to the first buckle. Now what you achieve here is two things. Number one, actually three. Number one, the billets run with the muscle fiber of the horse. And number two, the cross exactly where nature crosses. And then now imagine this billet here would go straight to this point. And there's a little clip here on the saddle where my mouse is. So if you were to let that go, make that back clip longer, so this is a V, it would run parallel with the latissimus, would cross here, right there where you see on this horse, the billets, and then it would come to the first buckle. So now the billets hang in the right spot, and the first billet, what comes from the front back to the second buckle, holds the saddle position so it doesn't go forward. Now, it also increases stability because like in any garden gate or roofs, you see sometimes the axis exposed, and that gives the roof or the garden gate the stability. So crossing the billets, you see it on the Swiss mount saddles, like for tracking, for backpacking, or like I just showed you on the army saddle, how the billets came together to a big D-ring, and from there it went to a billet. Okay, so it's important that the D-ring doesn't swing free from side to side, so it can be fixed. And you have the chance to position the billets in the right spot. Now the question would be, would you always do cross billets? Not necessary. If the horse's mane is not split 100% even on left and right, or if the upper arm of the horse is a little flatter and the scapula is straighter, and line 2, okay, behind the shoulder, would actually be in line with the elbow. In other words, the whole shoulder blade is more upright, the whole saddle still sitting behind the scapular, sits more forward, and then the billet would be on the right spot, and the girth therefore. So cross billeting gives a huge potential to stabilize the saddle, but it's not always possible. It totally depends on the symmetry of the horse and how far the scapula goes back.
Hey, thank you for that explanation. And the next one is actually also about billets. This one is, for saddles with 3 billets, how do you know which ones you should be using for a horse with uneven shoulders or some sort of asymmetry?
Okay, so let me find a picture with uneven shoulders. Here we go. The first time I saw horses with uneven shoulder, it was my own horse, my first international horse I had, and I thought, well, it must be my crooked riding, because I learned rider scala is number 5, straightening your horse. And then I read a book in 1986 from Tony Gonzalez, Proper Movement and Balance, and he's a 5th generation farrier, and he said some horses, majority of the horses, are not 100% symmetric in the shoulder. And then in 2001, I wrote a book written by a veterinarian, and on her front page about the saddle fitting book, she puts a horse similar to this here, where the mane is to the right and the left shoulder is bigger and the right shoulder is further forward. So I looked at that and says, interesting. And then I read the book and all the books, and I noticed that there's so many different opinions why the shoulders is small, why the horse is uneven. But what I find fascinating is the most horses support their weight when they graze with their stronger arm, the right arm. And the leg, what is grazing, stretch more forward, the left, is actually the shoulder, which will become higher, like you see here on the left in the picture. So what that also does is make the mane go to the right. Like I just said to you in the earlier question, I showed you a book from, it was an army saddle designed by Mcclellan in 1857. And he said, you know, it's very important to understand horses are not 100% symmetric. Left and right can be, like on human, sometimes quite a bit of difference. 7 out of 10 look like the left horse, okay, bigger left shoulder, and you see the mane going to the right. 2 out of 10, the mane would go to the left, and the right shoulder would be bigger, and the left shoulder would move more forward. And 1 out of 10, the mane would be spread absolutely in the middle, front to back, ears to withers, and the shoulders would be super symmetrical. Compare that to a human. Majority of us are right-handed. There are some left-handed people, but also one or the other person who is ambidextrous. So with billets, you know, the Western saddle or army saddle has just one big change. However, on some Western saddle, you may notice there's different D-rings on the left and right side where you can position it. Or the Western saddle has a rigging system, like on the army saddle, where you can position the billets. Dressage saddles have sometimes 2 billets, sometimes 3, but they also have sometimes what we call a V system. I'm going to share that, stop that screen share here for a second to show you. You can see here, there is 2 billets on the saddle. And then back here, there is a clip. So some saddles have the billets attached very much in the front, one in the center, but some of them have a V, like this one has a V here. Maybe I can show you on the other side. Here the webbing is out. Okay, so that billet is actually attached to that webbing, but also to the webbing on the center. So it's a big V. So that controls how you pull the saddle. So you have dressage saddles where you can have different position of the billets, and then you have jumping saddles or general purpose saddles, some dressage saddle too, where you have 3 billets. So the question is, how come one saddle has only 3 billets? One billet, like the Western saddle or army saddle. One dressage only have, well, they only have the 2 billets, and then some saddles have 3 billets. The way it was explained to me with the 3 billets was, well, when one rips off, you have still a spare one. It's just a spare billet. And then I thought, but the dressage saddle doesn't have a spare billet, and the dressage saddle doesn't, and the Western saddle, army saddle doesn't have a spare billet. There must be something to do with positioning the billet systems. And when you look back and you see how army saddles were there, they looked at this horse and says, the front limb, the upper part of the front part of the horse, the shoulder blade here, is not connected to the rib cage, like on humans. And whatever shoulder is larger is further back. And most of the time also you will see the girth groove is further back. So if you put the saddle on the horse here where my mouse is on, and you have a saddle with 3 billets, wherever the shoulder is bigger, you go to the back 2 billets. And wherever the shoulder is less developed, and wherever the shoulder is further forward, the girth groove on the bottom will be also further forward. So what you need to do, you need to girth the first and the second billet on the right side. Now, some people will say, whoa, but then my girth is diagonal on the horse's rump, on the sternum. So it's not 100% square to the body. Well, first of all, the horse is not 100% square. And no matter what you do, what billets you're going to use, the girth will go in that position. We call that gravity. and law of nature, because the girth will always, you see the rib cage, how it goes narrow here, towards the front it goes narrow, it will always look for the narrowest spot. So if you girth it the way I said, on the bigger shoulder, the back 2 billets, on the forward shoulder, the less developed shoulder, the first 2 billets, here's the best part. The girth will go where it always will go, diagonal, but your saddle will stay straight. If you ignore what I just said, and you make the billets on your dressage saddle, Western saddle, Army saddle, or short billets, you girth 1 and 3, 1 and 3 on both sides. Your girth will go crooked, and so will your saddle. That means your saddle will shift and twist and puts a massive number on the horse's spine because your saddle keeps torquing, like twisting to one side. Now, we know that the majority of the human are right-handed, but even a saddle, what's ridden by a left-handed rider, the billets will push the saddle over to the right. 7 out of 10 saddles was ridden and the horse's mane goes to one side, go badly to the right side. You can stop that, right? You can help it by knowing why do I use what billet if my horse looks like that. So that's why it's important to understand the why. Okay, so there is a reason why some Western saddle have more than one D-ring on one side where you touch the chinch. There's a reason why dressage saddle have 2 long billets, but these billets can be in different positions, left side and right side. And there is a reason why you have 3 billets on the general purpose, some dressage and jumping saddle, not because as a safety billet as an extra. Okay, that's not the reason. It's so that you can put the girth on the right billet what matches your horse's shoulders.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And actually, to dovetail off that a little bit, we had a question in regards to shoulder relief contoured girths and what your opinion is on it. Because the shoulder is fairly high up. So to think that a girth can provide shoulder relief is a little bit of, I guess, it's more marketing than it is truth. And Jochen will sort of explain why.
Okay. So as I was saying earlier, sometimes the upper arm is very upright and the scapula is really, really long due to the fact the way these horses are bred today. Okay, we have horses who are not shorter in the legs and have these, longer backs. We have horses who look more like this horse here. Okay, so the girth groove is forward, but when we look where the edge of the shoulder is, let me go back to that one spot I had earlier, that one picture. Okay, so maybe that's a good picture. Okay, so here you see the upper arm is relatively flat, scapular, what I call normal, like the old-fashioned way. And if I drop that line down to line 2, it's almost where the elbow is. But more and more horses, especially Baroque horses or Arabs, part of Baroque style, have more upper arm, and then the scapula comes all the way back. So the girth groove is almost in front of the saddle. So if we have the shoulder here and the girth is here, and the billets, like the first question where we saw the lady pulling the saddle forward, let me pull that up again, okay? The lady has to take the billets because she knows, oh yeah, the saddle has to stay behind the shoulder, okay? And now pulls this forward, that will pull the saddle into the shoulder. Okay, so now if I sell this lady a girth, what's a shoulder relief girth? In other words, if I put a girth on here, it will relieve this shoulder. The idea is I design a girth so the saddle will not be pulled forward due to the girth, but the girth cannot determine where the saddle ends. That's done by the billets. So you write, Sonia, it's a little bit of a marketing scheme, okay? Even if I design a girth where the base sits here and then it S curves back, So the buckle is here. So it's like a design shape. The back of the girth at the end of the sternum, there would be such a tremendous pressure on less than a centimeter width. And then the rest of the girth, let's say 4-inch girth on the front of the sternum, has absolutely no contact. Like if I would say to people, ride with a very narrow girth, like a width of your stirrup leather, people look at me and says, that would totally cut into his in his chest, in his elbows, and not in his elbows, in his pectoralis. Yeah, so is that so-called shoulder relief girth. You can totally test it. All you have to do is ride with it, girth it on so the saddle doesn't slide all over. And when you finish riding, don't ungirth it. See if you can get a pen, just a normal pen like this, and slide it. Let me demonstrate what I mean. So let's say this is the girth. The horse's head is this way. The horse's back is this way. So while your horse saddle is still girthed up, try to see if you can get your pen through here. There is no way you can't even get your finger through here. While the front gaps away, like I'm demonstrating here, it just hangs. It hangs like this. There's no contact in the front. So if you get one of those shoulder relief girth, yes, it might keep the buckle back here, but the cutting into the pectoralis muscle you see here and on the bottom of the sternum, it's quite severe.
Okay, and with many equine products, a lot of it really is a marketing scheme, and you really have to sort of look into the science behind the design and also how essentially the saddle moves and how it's essentially physics in regards to when the billets are pulled, you know, how is something that is ergonomically shaped going to support that and not move and not dig in. The next question we have is, if the billets of the saddle do not align correctly with the sternum of the horse, is there anything that the owner can do to fix this, or do they need to essentially get a new saddle? Speaking for the saddles where the billets are not adjustable.
Yes, so let's say you cannot adjust your saddles, your billets. If you think about a horse from the top, let me see if I find the picture. If I look at the horse from the top down, the rib cage goes always narrow towards the front. Okay, so if I would take a circumference at the first billet, it's way smaller the circumference than at the second billet. So while you have a saddle and the billets hang absolutely even, if you girth them up on the horse with a very, very well sprung rib cage, you will see your billet holes may line up, but the tension of each billet is completely different. So sometimes the front billet is loose, so you tighten at one hole, now the back billet is loose. Or back to the question, we put the saddle on the horse and you see that the billets are stretched and you can't adjust them and they're uneven. So my recommendation is, if you cannot replace them, I would immediately replace them. For us, as saddle makers or saddle fitters or riders or instructors, we always say if your billets are stretched, okay, then you need to replace them as soon as you can. Why? It's kind of like with your car. If your tires on your car have no more profile, okay, you have no traction, and well, in some countries you go get a fine if you drive around with a certain amount of low profile on your tire. So the tire on the car is the wear and tear, and the billets on the saddle is wear and tear. So if you say, oh, I don't have the money and I can't replace them, or there's no person here you can replace them, then what I would do is have a saddle girth what has both sides elastic, and the best elastic, the best girth for a girth elastic is a girth what has 3 layers of elastic. Okay. In jumping, no more than 2 inches. In dressage, no more visible than 1 inch. Most important part, you should not be able to move the elastic. You should not be able to pull the elastic when you try it yourself. Remember, this buckle, most girth buckles, is a roller buckle. And the second you put the billet through from the saddle, this becomes a lever action. Right? So this is like a pulley action. So the billet goes through. Now you have twice the strength, and you'd be surprised how much this gives. If you get a girth, what is easy stretched, just like holding it this way, most people over-girth the saddle, and the girth is way too tight because every time the animal exhales, that girth wants to come closer. So my recommendation, if you cannot replace the stretched billet, get a girth that has both sides elastic with very minimal give.
And sticking to the topic of girths, what type of girth would you recommend?
Horses are different in their physique and anatomy from horse to horse. And here we see respiratory health, and we talk about this a lot in saddle fitting, BL13, that's a lung meridian point. So all of these points here, okay, has something to do how the horses breathe. So some horses get really, really irritated and have a hard time because these points here get hit or hurt quite a bit, either through pressure or misshaped design, like we just talked about the shoulder relief girth, or the thickness of the girth. Some horses, like Arabs, they have super, super narrow elbows. So when I have a horse, let's take this up here, have a little mini leg. Let's try to simulate that. All right, so here we got a horse with broken leg. So here we got the elbow. Get the shoulder out of the way. So the elbow of the horse on some horses, okay, this little guy here, some horses, if this is the rib cage here, when they move, there's a lot of space. But some horses, this elbow is super, super tight. So my hand being the rib cage, okay? So when you stick your hand between the elbow of the horse, okay, and the rib cage, you notice, whoa, is it ever narrow, okay? So what I recommend when you have a horse with a very tight elbow, when the leg goes back and forth, whoopsie, there goes my leg. Go with the girth, what is super, super thin from the side, this way. So this way. I'm not talking about this width. I'm talking about the thickness through here. Now, if you look at working horses, back to army horses or Western horses, you always see they have a cotton girth. When I started riding in the late 60s, 70s, the only girth what you could see was the string girth, cotton string girth. Now, there's some out of mohair, and they're really, really good because they're taking the unevenness of the rib cage and the billets very well in consideration. And they're very, very flat. If you say, yeah, but they don't have elastic, I have a sore elbow, and I want to have a girth with elastic, not too long, remember? Then I recommend anything. There's a lot of good neoprene girth out there. Or, as I said, a very, very, very flat leather girth, because some horses, they just can't have any cotton girth, neoprene girth. The only thing what works for them is a leather girth. But keep in mind, it's not the width of the girth, it's the thickness of the girth, okay? So flat, flat, flat. The next thing what I recommend towards the girth is where the buckles end, okay? So we want to have always the buckles end away from any muscle edges, clear from the elbow, and we don't want it too high or too low if it's a short billets, in other words, long girth. Okay, we want to have the girth buckle either just below the widest part from the horse's body, so the girth actually pulls away from the body, and that's what you see many, many Western saddles have. The horse is relatively small, but the girth is anywhere from 28 to 32. And horses, dressage, many, many dressage horses have girth, beautiful girth, but it's too short and they sit right off the edge of the pectoralis muscle. So when people ask me about what is the best girth, okay, so something you can easily keep clean, what is nice and flat, has a very, very minimum, but even elastic, which means on the left side and on the right side.
Okay, thank you. Our next question actually talks about unevenness. So for the everyday horse person who hasn't taken our course or hasn't taken any sort of anatomy course either, what is a quick way for them to determine if their horse is uneven, both in the shoulder and anywhere else along the back, or even through the loins or through the pelvis? Like, what is a quick way that they can do this and confirm it?
Okay, so let me throw this up again. Not everybody is comfortable, but I recommend if you groom your horse and he lets you stand behind, have somebody help you to get this horse absolutely square and have a nicely looking forward like this horse here. And then you eyeball, and you look, first of all, pay attention, which side does the mane go? Okay? The mane most of the time follows in the hollow side of the horse's body, in the area of the shoulder, okay? So if the left shoulder is bigger, it pushes the mane comb to the right and the mane falls to the right. So that's very often an indicator, unless the horse is out of alignment in the withers or in the neck. The next indicator of that is you could look over the horse's back, but you also can look at the horse's hoofs. There's been multiple articles written. One of the famous one is high heel, low heel syndrome. Horses with the bigger shoulders have most of the time a lower heel. So back to this horse here on the left, that horse would have a low left heel with a long toe, and his right heel would be high with a short toe. Okay, almost clubfoot. All right, so would be obviously the opposite. So I can see at the toe, the hoof, how the heels, I can look at the heels, I can look at the mane, and I can look from behind and I take a visual with the eyes, okay? Or we have other possibilities. What you can do, you can get yourself a piece of cardboard, flexible curve from Michael's, like one of the architectural rulers. And then when you trace that out, you put that on the cardboard, cut it out, put the cardboard on top, and then you mark the middle, and then from the middle, you put your phone or any kind of a level to get a right angle. And then you can see when you take it off, what shoulder is bigger. Sometimes you can really clearly see if you can't see it from the back. So these are the tips how you can see if the shoulders are even or uneven from the back or from the bottom. In terms of loins and hips, same thing. Stand behind the horse. If you're not 100% sure, stand far enough away and start up. Look from the fetlock to the hocks, up to the butt, and you won't believe what you see sometimes. We think all horses are 100% symmetric. They all have to be the same. And no, they're not machines. And sometimes they are not 100% symmetric. So when you look from behind, this is relatively good here, but some horses, that could be out in the SI, or they could be lower on the one side of the pelvis or the other side. That is quite common. Okay, so if before I put my saddle on and I want to see, hey, how symmetric is my horse? Have somebody holding him absolutely square, standing in line, make sure his feet are side by side, and then you won't believe your eyes. And then you go, oh my God, what's wrong with my horse? Again, we are as human not 100% symmetric, neither is the horse. Sometimes, yes, you need to get a chiropractor or a physiotherapist or somebody who helps you to realign it. And sometimes it's just the way it is. I remember this top trainer. He was also the top veterinarian for the 3-day event course in England. He said to me, I love eventing, but I also do a little bit training on the racetrack. And sometimes he says to me, I see horses, they are so crooked, but they don't fail the wet sack. They're absolutely sound. But when you look at their anatomy, you think, oh my God, look how crooked they are. And yet that's okay. It's nature. The horses are not being put to this earth to have something very symmetric for the humans to ride or plow the field or win the war. That was not the intention. So sometimes unevenness could not hurt the horse, but the saddle will fall in the hollow side. If it's in the front or in the back, it will go one or the other direction. And then you have that snowball effect where you then say, how come this horse is so great without a rider, but as soon as I do it with a rider, the horse looks lame? Well, because you hang on one side, like this girl here. You know, she just hang on one side. You know, so if we want to understand biomechanics and we want to understand how we balance our self in the saddle, left to right, front to back, you know, whatever's in between us, the mediator, the saddle, will take the shape from the horse. And that's where saddle fitting comes in. So back to the original question, how can I see or how can I determine if my horse is symmetric or unsymmetric? In the front, it's a visual, it's a feel. In the back, most of the time, it's a visual. Okay, I hope that answers the question, Sonia.
And actually, to continue with that, in regards to unevenness, because as we know, most horses are uneven, what amount of unevenness does the rider need to have the saddle actually fitted asymmetrically as opposed to just adjusting which billets they use?
Okay, so that's a really tough question because there could be so many variables. Because we know the majority of the riders are right-handed and they themselves ride stronger on one side than they really realize. Okay, so sometimes it's a man-made problem, so it comes from the rider, and sometimes it comes from the horse. So in this picture here, while I have it, look where the stirrup leathers are. Okay, so as the trainer, I would have the rider ride without stirrup leathers. You know, so is she pushing the saddle over because she is stronger on the right? Majority of the people do it. If you do the billets correctly, like I just discussed a couple minutes ago, right? And you take the stirrup leathers away, you can very quick eliminate two big factors. Number one, the girth doesn't pull your saddle crooked. And number two, the rider, because he's stronger right-handed or left-handed, doesn't kick the saddle one way or the other. Because without stirrup leather, the rider needs to develop and really focus on his or her seat, the balance. Okay, so I'm going to jump to this picture here. We took a cast of two people, a girl and a boy, and the feet pretty much hang in the area. So everything is slippery, everything is kind of gooey, wet, and the only way they didn't fall back or forward or left or right is because they held their core. So when you ride without stirrup leathers, you got to ride with your core. So now you have the shoulder, hips, and heels alignment without your stirrup leathers because your leg go forward, you fall back. Now the saddle still goes crooked. Remember, when the leg goes forward on the horse's body, that lower leg will push the upper leg up and the scapula rotates in the upwards, backwards motion. Let's say for 7 horses, here's a good demonstration. Leg goes forward, pushes the upper arm up, and the scapular rotates upwards, backwards. So this got to slide underneath that saddle. Now imagine your horse, you've done everything. You know, the saddle and the rider, you got the right girthing, but the saddle still goes to one side. Okay? Some cases, it is extreme and you can't help it. No matter what you do, like this one, the saddle will always go to the right, with or without stirrup leathers, with the billets. There you need to do an orthopedic adjustment. Orthopedic adjustment is just like what the farrier does when he shoes the horse. He will never, the farrier will never put the exact same symmetric shoe on every foot. He looks at the hoof, how the horse is walking or walked, how he wore his feet, his hoof, and then forms the metal to the hoof, not the opposite. Bad farriers rasp the hoof to his symmetric metal. But then we all know, who's been around horses, the horse would be lame and done forever. So if we fit shoes with metal or saddles with metal, and you have a horse what is super strong, if it's an injury, or is it just the horse is born with that? Because yeah, you can train the horse straight, but sometimes you can't because the unevenness is in the upper arm of the horse when they're born, and that's nothing you can change. So now, what's my choice? Riding with the crooked saddle, what constantly twist against the horse's back? Or can I do an orthopedic adjustment where I'm going to open the left side of the tree point? So let me show you. I'm going to get a tree for you. Now that doesn't work with plastic trees or any disposable trees like wood trees. Then you can't do that with that, because if you do that, the whole tree would twist. So that's why the Society of Master Saddlers always freaks out when I talk about this, because you can't do it with the saddle. Okay, that's kind of like you're trying to put a leather sole on a rubber boot. Right? It's not meant to do these changes. So if I have a saddle with a flex tree, adapt tree, or binate tree, there's multiple different trees. So an orthopedic adjustment, I can open the left side, just the left side here, okay, without twisting the whole saddle in itself. So if a horse's bigger shoulder is left, I open the left side. So now when the scapular comes upwards, backwards, that saddle will not be pushed and jerked over to the right. It allows that bigger shoulder to slide through. So that's what veterinarians call an orthopedic adjustment. You don't need custom saddles for that. You don't need a special saddle. Just like how you open that metal, you can close it again. That type of technology exists since 1958, but most people don't know it, and most people don't need an orthopedic adjustment. But if you have a horse, remember 7 out of 10 look like this horse, okay? And you do not have that metal correctly placed, that shoulder will come back. It is inevitable, and that will happen no matter what you decide. And you see many veterinarians complain, problem on the horse's left shoulder, jerks and pushes and twists the saddle against the lumbosacral joints and area, and you see all the torque here on the spine. That's just because you did not pay attention to the left shoulder. Many scapular damage on the left, wither damages on the left, atrophy on the left. So we see a common pattern, the same with the left scapular. We see a lot of problems here. Again, leg goes forward, upper arm goes up, scapula goes back. Now, if you don't have a saddle, what can do the orthopedic adjustment? In jumping, the rider gets pushed over dramatically, or just enough so the rider can counterbalance that with the left. And sometimes in bigger jumps like cross country or steeplechase, the shoulder can't come through and hits and you somersault. So sure, you could say that's quite dramatic, but that's what it is. If the horses cannot get that shoulder through it, that shoulder will be damaged. And that's what, thank God, it's not just me anymore saying that. There's videos all over the internet, people showing that. And that's kind of cool that I can share that with you, because it is there to protect you, the owner, the riders, and mainly the horse.
And just as a side note, there is a huge difference between an adjustable saddle and an interchangeable saddle. So saddles that have an interchangeable gullet are not technically considered adjustable. So there is a difference between the two. And the final question, this is going to be a relatively quick one, is if the horse is uneven, is there something that the rider can do in regards to watching the movement of the saddle? Like, what are some symptoms? Will the tail be held to one side? Will the horse feel like he's maybe stepping in a hole? What are some symptoms of a horse who is uneven having the saddle constantly torqued and twisted? Like, what are the symptoms of a horse whose saddle doesn't suit his asymmetries?
Okay, what really helps a lot before you look at the symptoms, I would have people lead their own horse, and then you sit on the horse further back, and you put your hands, you see the jeans of the rider, but put your hands on the shoulder so you can feel how the shoulder comes and goes, comes and goes. So you really understand the bigger shoulder is very dramatic, and you keep feeling that, okay? Now imagine instead of your hand, there would be metal. Metal like this gullet plate here, okay? In digging it. So the symptoms would be in the jumper, the left leg is lower, and unless you have a very athletic horse like this, where it jumps like a cat over the fence, most of the time the left leg hits the front rail or the back right leg. Other thing is stumble. You see a lot of stumble. The other symptoms is you see a lot of dry spots on the left side. The other symptoms is you're trying to get the horse to bend to the left, but they don't want to. They kick their buck. They barely get a rightly canter or right shoulder in. Another symptoms would be you notice how behind the shoulder that gets deeper and deeper, and you see this jiggity line on the shoulder. That's that cranial nerve 11. You see that nerve line. That's the cranial nerve 11, and then it inserts in the trapezius muscle. So you see the physical change and damage. You see the tail if the saddle goes to the right. The elongation of the spine is the tail. So you will see the tail going to the right. This is not it, but all this here, the spine goes all the way to the back of the tail. Okay, so you see that a lot. You see deeper indents on the left loin than on the right loin because the saddle is shifting to the right. Very often it goes to the right. On, again, 7 out of 10 horses, that's what it is. But you could have the opposite where the saddle goes to the left. You stand behind the horse and you notice, whoa, look how my horse's spine deviated in the spine. It looks like a scoliosis. So the whole body starts to bore to the left. Okay, that's when the saddle keeps going to the left. So these are the physical changes, but the number one changes you always see, and I always say, the eyes and ears don't lie. You know, if your horse starts to show you any of those signs, start to investigate. Look where the mane is. How high is the left heel, the right heel? Feel it, measure it, stand behind, get a friend to hold it and look it up. Or better, have a friend riding behind you and check out how the evenness is of the shoulders.
And just to add in for everyone, another symptom is actually when you're riding, if the horse feels like he stepped into a hole with his hind leg, chances are the saddle is crossing over and connecting with his spine due to unevenness, and that's causing him to drop away.
Exactly.
And I have one more question in the 1 minute that we have left. What do you think about Icelandic saddles, as they're usually placed further back and supposedly allow more shoulder movement?
Yeah, so Icelandic saddles used to be really, really bad. And thankfully that more and more veterinarians says, you know, we don't need, like on this big lake or these Tennessee Walker, put the saddle so much back that we put so much pressure into the loin. So the horse drops his back, he can tip his shoulder back, he gets more action, but mainly they do not want to have the horse canter. So thankfully to many veterinarians who now say, you know what, you don't need to hurt the Icelandic horses. They are natural to gait. And the saddle design, the Icelandic saddle, changed dramatically. And they have shoulder relief panels now. So the rider doesn't need to sit behind the 15th rib, right? So that's a very vulnerable area for the horse to carry the rider. And the saddle doesn't need to press behind T18, the thoracic vertebrae 18, where the horse will be then super difficult to carry anything, right? So Icelandic saddles, today, the modern ones are much, much better. The older ones, I'm going 20 years back, they're quite a torture device, just that the horse won't canter in their pacing or trot.
And just to add in, any saddle that is placed further back, you have to always consider that just because you're placing the saddle further back, it doesn't mean that it's beneficial to the horse. There's a space between the edge of the scapula and the last thoracic vertebrae doesn't change. So when you start to push the saddle backwards, you're now risking going onto the lumbar where no saddle pressure should ever be. So just keep that in mind for any sort of saddle. If you feel like you have to position your saddle, 4 inches back to protect the shoulder, bear in mind your girth is going to pull it forward into the girth groove and you're going to be sitting on the lumbar. So the movement of the back will constantly push it forward and into the shoulder anyway.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sonia. That was a great Friday afternoon again. I look forward to next Friday. And I say goodbye with your favorite video. Thank you, Sonia.